Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something really cool. We're putting ancient, unwritten oral traditions to the absolute ultimate scientific test. For centuries, farmers literally just looked up at the sky. They relied on this generational wisdom, these simple rules of thumb, just to figure out when to plant their crops. But let's be honest, in our modern age of supercomputers and satellite weather maps, it's pretty easy to just dismiss all those old sayings as, well, just superstitions, right? But today, we're putting that exact assumption to the test. We're diving into this brilliantly simple piece of research.
And it all boils down to this one question. Can an ancient folk proverb actually predict the weather better than a modern forecast? It's the ultimate showdown, really. Superstitious agricultural lore in one corner and cold, hard data science in the other. What actually happens when you take culturally transmitted rules, stuff passed down strictly by word of mouth for hundreds of years, and run them through a massive modern meteorological database? Do they hold any water? Pun absolutely intended. Or are they just, old wives' tales?
To figure this whole thing out, researchers honed in on two very specific Hebrew folk proverbs. The first one is pretty widely known in Israeli folk culture. If Rosh Chodesh is rainy, the whole month will be rainy. Okay, simple enough. But the second proverb, this is where it gets really intriguing. If it rains on Shabbat Mevarechim, the whole month will be rainy. Now, what makes the second one so incredibly special is that it literally has no written source. None. It survives purely through Hasidic oral tradition. For generations upon generations, people have been repeating these phrases, basically betting their entire winter harvests on them. But to really test them, we first got to understand exactly when these specific days happen. So both of these proverbs are tethered to the Hebrew lunisolar calendar. Rosh Chodesh translates literally to the head of the month, so that's day one of the lunar cycle. Shabbat Mevarechim, on the other hand, is the Saturday immediately preceding that new month. It's when the community traditionally blesses the upcoming month. Now, because of how the calendar shifts, Shabbat Mevarechim can happen anywhere from 1 to 7 days before Rosh Chodesh. So think about what the ancients were doing here. They were essentially betting the farm on this. They were claiming that whatever the weather is doing on these highly specific, culturally important anchor days, well, that's going to set the tone for the entire month to come. All right, to find out if there's any truth to this, the researchers didn't just casually look at the last couple of winters. Oh no, they built an absolutely massive data set. We're talking about 191,758 station days of daily precipitation data. That is huge. It spans 75 years of continuous daily weather tracking from 1950 all the way to 2024. So we're not dealing with anecdotal evidence here. This is a highly robust, multi-decade statistical evaluation that is designed to leave literally zero room for doubt. And they didn't just limit this to one single location either. If you know anything about the geography there, Israel features these incredibly sharp climatic contrasts over extremely short distances. So they pulled data from 7 distinct testing grounds across 3 totally different climatic regions. You've got the relatively rainy, storm-heavy north in places like Haifa and Sfat. Then there's the central coastal and mountainous regions, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. And finally, the hyper-arid southern deserts down in Beersheba and Eilat. Okay, so the data is completely locked in, the timeline is set. What did 75 years of hard numbers actually reveal about our ancient proverbs? Okay, let's dive into this because the verdict in the data is absolutely stunning. Both of these ancient proverbs actually work. I mean, look at this. Notice the lift column over on the far right. If Rosh Chodesh is rainy, the probability of that entire month being rainy jumps by 16.4 percentage points. And even more wild, that unwritten, purely oral tradition about Shabbat Mevarchim produced an almost identical effect, a 16.5 percentage point lift. Even though that day can happen up to a full week before the month even starts, this unwritten rule of thumb turns out to be a highly significant predictor of long-term weather. No way, right? To really wrap our heads around the practical impact of this, take a look at that dashed yellow line over on the left. That represents the baseline average. So a totally normal month has about a 26% chance of being historically rainy. But if an ancient farmer simply walked outside and noticed it was raining on Rosh Chodesh, that blue bar right there, their odds of a wet month suddenly jumped to almost 39%. That's nearly a 1.8-fold increase in probability. Honestly, that is a massive statistical edge for an agricultural society that was operating completely without satellites or fancy computer models. They essentially use their calendar to hack probability. So this brings us to a really fascinating crossroads. The statistics are undeniable at this point. The proverbs work. But why? Why do they work? Does the lunar cycle actually dictate the atmosphere? Are we talking about some kind of mystical connection between the phases of the moon and the rain clouds over the Mediterranean? Well, the cool part about this explainer is that we aren't just going to stop at the statistics. We have to hunt down the actual hidden physical mechanism. And it turns out the answer has absolutely nothing to do with the moon. It's actually a very real, very physical atmospheric phenomenon known as Mediterranean cyclones, or more specifically, cypress lows. See, almost all of Israel's winter rain comes from these extratropical storm systems. Think of them as these massive winter weather engines. And the defining characteristic of a cypress low is that it doesn't just rain for an hour and then clear up. No, these systems are massive and they linger. They typically create these wet spells that hover over the region for 3 to 5 days. Hold on to that 3 to 5 day number in your head because it is the absolute secret key to unraveling this entire piece of folklore.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the breakthrough hiding right up in the top right corner. Remember how we said Shabbat Mevarechim can happen anywhere from 1 to 7 days before the new month? Well, when the researchers broke the data down by that specific lag time, this brilliant pattern just jumped right out. When the lag is only 3 days, the predictive power of the proverb is completely off the charts. It's a nearly 33-point lift. But look what happens at day 7. The predictive power just completely vanishes. It drops down to just 1.5 points, which is practically zero. So the proverb really only works if the anchor day falls within that 3 to 5 day window of the new month.
And this directly, literally connects to the actual physics of the weather. Take a look at this daily rainfall autocorrelation graph. Now, that's just a fancy scientific way of measuring how well rain today predicts rain tomorrow. Notice how those blue and orange bars are super high on days 1, 2, and 3, but then they completely flatline by day 7? This proves without a doubt that those ancient farmers didn't stumble onto some kind of lunar magic. What they did was empirically observe the exact lifespan of a Mediterranean cyclone. They took a 3 to 5 day atmospheric persistence pattern and perfectly encoded it into a culturally memorable proverb. It's kind of genius.
Actually, to put the final nail in the lunar magic coffin, the researchers ran the exact same test, but this time they used a completely arbitrary calendar-agnostic anchor, the first of the standard Gregorian civil month. And guess what? It works just as well. It gives a 19.5 percentage point lift. So the truth is, pretty much any arbitrary day you pick is going to predict the next few days, purely because weather persists. The ancients simply took a completely real physical phenomenon, the lifespan of a storm, and they pinned it to the most socially salient dates on their calendar so that nobody would ever forget it. Honestly, it's an absolute masterclass in indigenous ecological knowledge.
But our explainer takes a bit of a sobering turn right about here, and this brilliantly illustrates the hidden costs of a warming world. Look at that graph up on the top left, showing the proverb's predictive power over time. See that red dashed line? That is a steep, undeniable downward trend. Over the 75-year study period, these ancient proverbs have actually been losing accuracy at a rate of 0.20 percentage points every single year. Back in the 1950s, this rule of thumb was a fantastic, reliable predictor. But today, it's barely holding on. The folklore itself is actively breaking down. So why exactly is this happening? Well, here's the climate twist. The data shows that the actual number of rainy anchor days is increasing by about 0.2% per year. But, and this is a big but, the total monthly rainfall is not increasing at all. What this actually means physically is that human-driven climate change is literally fracturing the weather mechanism that these ancients relied on. The Mediterranean is transitioning. It's moving away from those persistent week-long cyclone systems and shifting toward shorter, spottier, much more isolated rain events. Basically, it rains for a day and then it just stops. And the crucial point we really need to take away from this is profound. Changing weather regimes do so much more than just alter a few precipitation metrics on a spreadsheet somewhere. They actually erase indigenous ecological knowledge. What we are witnessing here is the death of a millennial-old agricultural rule of thumb. This proverb was perfectly, meticulously tuned over centuries of careful human observation to a very specific climate. And it's actively dying today for one simple, heartbreaking reason. That specific climate just no longer exists.
It's a striking reminder, isn't it? Human culture and our physical environment are intimately, permanently linked. Those ancient farmers were brilliant. I mean, they observed incredibly complex atmospheric physics without a single satellite, and they encoded that truth into a cultural tradition that survived for generations. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to end on. As our planet continues to warm and our baseline physical realities keep shifting, what other ancient, hard-won human wisdom is quietly being rendered completely obsolete and lost forever? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep looking for the data behind the stories.